Bridget, I'm so delighted that you're here to share your thoughts about Reinert Alumni Library and this marvelous 50th anniversary celebration. First of all, why don't you start off by telling us what makes Reinert Alumni Library special?
Well, in fact, this very room that we're in right now, the Rare Books room, is a place that I really associate with the beginning of my relationship with Creighton, because when I came here in February of 1996, this is where I had part of my interview for the position that I now hold. And I remember being in here and giving a presentation to the English department and just really soaking in the atmosphere and really being appreciative of the fact that Reinert had something like the Rare Books room, that they really valued, especially coming from my background as someone who studies 18th century, that they really valued old books and they valued preserving old books, and that there was a commitment to a kind of tradition and a kind of sense of book history. And so that was really appealing to me. As soon as I got here, because I do work on a remote historical period with my scholarship, I started to give Lynn Schneiderman, the interlibrary loan librarian, a workout. And one of the things that I just really from the start was exciting to me was that she never batted an eyelash. No request was too obscure, no request was too strange. Only rarely was she not able to find something for me, and even then, you know, we worked around and she would find microfilms and help me in every single way. So the library has just been terrific in terms of encouraging and helping my research. And I've also loved the fact that I've been able to contribute not only to build the collection here, to be able to give feedback about what are the resources that the library needs, what are the new titles that we need, what are some of the areas that we can build up. So I've really felt like a partner in the future of the library in terms of building that collection, and that's been really exciting.
Now, Bridget, you raised the role that Lynn Schneiderman has played with you. I would like you to talk a little bit about how helpful the library staff is to faculty.
Boy, they are just amazing partners in every single way. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how many times I've turned to them for so many different reasons, not just with scholarship, and they've been amazing with scholarship, but also with teaching. Every semester I invite Mike Poma, for example, who's a reference subject librarian, to come and speak to my classes and talk to them about research resources. And the great thing about that is every time he comes to overview with my class, and he's a great teacher, by the way, I learn something. I learn about a new resource. I learn about what's happening because, as you know, as things are digitized, as things go online, it just changes almost week to week. So, I mean, Mike has been a wonderful colleague and resource. You know, Mary Nash also has been somebody who's been a magnificent colleague, and I've had the privilege of working with Mary not only with classes, with class planning, with the prize that they do every year for student research, but she's also been instrumental with our Phi Beta Kappa application. Mary, of course, is a member of Phi Beta Kappa, and she was there and helped prepare the 400-page application and gave us all of our information about library resources. So that's been really tremendous. And so those are just a few of the folks that I can mention. And, you know, Jerry at the front desk, who I love to see every time I come in, love to visit and catch up with. So it's just a really wonderful place, and a place where I know I have colleagues who are just top-notch and who I can count on.
So what you're really saying is that Reinert Library is helping Creighton with somewhat limited library resources compared with the Research One, give faculty the access that is probably equal to anybody, anywhere. And you might want to talk.
You know, I have to say, I mean, that's always a concern, I think, for new faculty coming in, and, you know, and was maybe a concern for me, and I see it with new faculty who are coming in also who I talk with. But, you know, I have never felt a gap. I mean, perhaps when it comes to looking at manuscripts, but even then, Lynn has been terrific about helping me get microfilms. So in some ways, I feel like I almost have it better than somebody at a Research One, because I've got these colleagues who I can just call up on the phone, and they know me and they know what I'm researching, and I can say, you know what, here's this issue, here's what I need, how can we do this? How can you help me? And I don't think I'd get that same sort of collegial assistance that I would at a big, enormous R1 library. And, you know, I've been surprised. I've really been surprised at things that Creighton actually does have in the collection. You know, there have been numerous times where I just assumed we didn't have it, and so I would send off an interlibrary loan note to Lynn, and she'd write back and she'd say, actually, Dr. Keegan, here's the call number. And I'd be embarrassed, and I'd be saying, okay. So I've learned now to check, because we do have a pretty rich collection, even with the limited resources. You know, sure, it's challenging. I know a lot of those, there's some databases that I wish we could have that we can't afford. You know, but I think the library's been terrific with working with me. And there are some things that, you know, they have worked with me to allow us access to, like the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. We've got a limited site license, but at least we've got access to it. So, you know, except for some of the more expensive databases, which I'll have to go to UNL to use, you know, I have really not felt a pinch at all. Which is not to say we don't need more funding and we don't need to keep up building those resources, but you know, I am just in awe of the way that the staff here really helps us to work around and to overcome some of those challenges.
Well, now, you mentioned also your work with the library on student research. Mm-hmm. And as a faculty member who is famous for her involvement with students and for preparing students for elite scholarship applications, talk a little bit about the way the library staff assists undergraduates who are definitely at the bottom of the food chain at Research One universities.
Absolutely. You know, that's the thing that I tell my students. They don't realize what a precious resource they have. And I try to tell them, you know, when they're starting a research project, to go in and make an appointment with the relevant subject librarian, whether that's Nathan, whether that's Mary, whether that's Mike, and really talk to them about what they're investigating, what they're looking at, because, you know, they're going to have the most up-to-date information about where to look. And they also know tips and hints about, you know, search terms and how to enter the search terms so you get the most productive resources. So they really are kind of my collaborators in terms of teaching students about research, because they know more about research and researching than I can. At least in a kind of specialized way. So I really rely on them to kind of pick up the slack for me in terms of, especially when a student's researching an area that's not my area of expertise, to really be able to guide them and give them the skills. And the fact that, I mean, you can make an appointment, the fact that you can call them on the phone, the fact that you can do live chat now with a subject librarian when you're doing research at any time of the, I mean, I'm surprised. I get on, it's 11 o'clock at night and Mike Poma's doing the Ask Us thing. I think, my goodness, you know, that is such a tremendous resource that we have as a service to students. And I'm just so grateful for it, because, you know, it makes the papers and the research that I help students prepare so much better and so much easier to read. And, you know, I wish students would take advantage of it more. I think they don't realize. But then once they do, they come back and they've had a conversion experience and they say, oh my gosh, that was amazing. I'm doing this for every paper. We could be in trouble if they all do, but I hope more of them do, because it is just an amazing, amazing resource. And I love the fact that they have the awards every year for students who've done the best research and really acknowledge it. And that's a wonderful honor for students to receive too. You know, I know this is a big area of debate, and this is changing because libraries want to respond to, you know, the needs of the students. So obviously, you know, being wireless, having workspaces where students can bring multiple kinds of devices where they can be able to access and download digital items, you know, be able to get on the internet, be able to take advantage of the technology that's there, but I think it's a balance, and I think it's you know, something that every library is going to have to struggle with. How many books do we keep? You know, we have limited storage space. How do we decide which books to keep? Which books are valuable? Which books are going to be valuable? It's a real challenge. But I think the advantage that a place like Creighton has is that there is coordination, there is collaboration. You know, when we talk about every year, you know, journals, for example, are getting so expensive. There's a conversation that goes on with the library staff and the departments, and they say, okay, here's our budget, here's the periodicals that you have. let's sit down and think about which are the ones we have to have, which are the ones we might be willing to let go to be able to get new ones, and so forth. So I feel like as we face that challenge, which is a challenge that every library is facing, wanting to be both a physical space where people can come together and work together and collaborate together, but also wanting to be a resource that people can access remotely and so forth. I think we have an advantage in that there's a conversation and that we're all faculty, staff, students, librarians, part of that, and we're all talking about it. And I've just been so grateful to have been involved in those conversations as we move forward.
And just to draw this to a bit of a conclusion, you've said a couple of things that I think I'd like to have you expand on a little bit. And one of them is this notion. A lot of people think of libraries as physical spaces holding books and magazines and dusty old newspapers. And everything that you have said, and my own experience as a faculty and a fanatical library user, is that when people take a bricks and mortar look at libraries, they're missing the whole point. That you're overlooking the fact that the information era is getting ever more complex. We have more access, but unless you're really trained, how do you find this wealth? So would you talk, maybe to conclude this, about the role of the library is not just bricks and mortar and documents, it's librarians, and how those librarians are going to be the transitional forces.
They're going to be the leaders. They're the ones. They're educating all of us. And I think that's an important fact to remember. The library staff is first and foremost educators. And they educate, as I said, they're my partners in teaching my classes. They're teaching me. They're educating me. They have a tremendous amount of knowledge and a tremendous sense of, it's their profession. It's where they're going. And I think to really honor that is important. I know some places library staff have faculty status. And again, I know that's kind of an issue, and some people want it, some people don't want it. But they really are. They're leaders, they're educators, and they really are. It's in the end, it's the people that make the place. It's not the building, it's not the dusty old newspapers, but it really is the people and the ethos of the people and the librarians who really are going to, I think, take us forward and make the difference.
Bridget, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
It's been a pleasure.
Father Bannatyne, would you describe the opening ceremony for this library in 1961?
All right. I should begin by saying that they actually dedicated 3 buildings that day. They dedicated this library, the Epley College of Business Administration, and Gallagher Hall. And the main ceremony was here at the library. This was done first. And then the whole group processed over to the other 2 places, and the ceremony there was much briefer. But they started here, as I say. The dignitaries here, Archbishop Gerald Bergen, the Archbishop of Omaha, was present, and Joseph Cardinal Ritter, the Archbishop of St. Louis at that time, was also here. And each of them had a priest master of ceremonies with them for the occasion, for the blessing and so forth. And then, of course, Father Carl Reinert, the president of Creighton University, vested with them and was part of the whole ceremony. He was the one that really introduced the whole affair to the people attending. There was a number of dignitaries from around Omaha and a large crowd from here at the university. And so he gave an opening welcome and explanation of the whole affair. And then the most of the more elaborate prayers, the longer ceremony was here in the library, as I say. What it actually consisted of was the, as I recall, and I'm not positive of it, but as I recall, Archbishop Bergen and Cardinal Ritter took turns. One of them did one building and the other one did the other one. And I think they, Archbishop Bergen did the library to start. Then Cardinal did one of the other buildings, Bishop Bergen, one of the others. But it would consist of a prayer, long prayer of introduction to the blessing, and then incense and holy water in the surrounding area, and then another prayer and blessing of the whole area. And they did it in a central area in each building.
Now, can you describe for people who don't remember Creighton in the 60s what the campus looked like? Wasn't California Street still open in front of the library?
It was. That was one of the things. I think they must have had campus security stopping traffic as we went across the street to go to Gallagher Hall. We had to cross California Street to get to Gallagher, where the mall is now. That was the city street. And I think they must have had them stopping traffic to make sure we got back and forth at the time. But the campus looked entirely different. None of the new residence halls were here yet. The first one that was built, as I recall, was Gallagher Hall. I think that predates Swanson and Keywood and Degelman. And so that was the first of the new residence halls, and that it was dedicated that day. But the library, of course, was entirely different. I'm vague on the exact details because I'm so used to the new library with the addition, but it was quite a bit smaller. The whole area where they have the study tables and all on the west side of it, that's all part of the new addition to the library. That wasn't part of the original building that was dedicated that day. But we were in the central, for the actual dedication ceremony, we were in the central area inside the main entrance of the original library. That's where the, as I say, the longest part of the ceremony was held.
Well, now, wasn't this building originally just Alumni Memorial Library?
That was the title, yes. That was the name of the library when it was first opened, yes.
Okay. For the people not fortunate enough to have known Father Reinert, talk about the addition of Father Reinert's name to this building and the remarkable impact that Father Reinert had on Creighton and what kind of guy he was.
Well, I got to know him fairly well during those years. He was a remarkable man. But the thing I always think, he came from a remarkable family. They were from Boulder, Colorado originally. And it was a large family, the Reinert family. He had an older brother, became a Jesuit. Father Paul Reinert was a long time president of St. Louis University and really one of the most distinguished educators in the country for the years that he was there. And then the thing about Father Carl was he was only ordained about 3 or 4 years when they made him president of Creighton University. And I think the Jesuits probably could see in him the same thing they saw in his brother, Father Paul. But he didn't have the education background, the studies background that his brother did, but he was such a good man at not only at fundraising, which was a big gift of his to be able to raise money for the university. He was also a great administrator. And so they made him the president, and he was a long-time president here for many years. And in the early years, he was also the superior of the Jesuit community here on campus, in addition to being president of the university.
Wow.
Which was very different for those days. They were just beginning to have the idea that there should be a separate Jesuit community with its own superior at that time. And so after he finished his term as president, they always had a separate superior and president.
Now, describe Father Reinert's personality. I've got to tell you, I knew Father Reinert and wrote many articles about him when I was a young World Herald reporter. And I have indelible memories of him, but I would like you to describe what happened when Father Carl Reinert walked into a room.
When he walked into a room, he just dominated the room. He had a magnificent voice. He didn't need to prepare at all to speak to a group. And when he spoke, people just listened. And he had a charism about him. You just knew that there was a magnetism about him. People just liked the man, and they were willing to listen and hear what he had to say whenever he came into a room. He just and his physical presence was very important too. He was a big man. He wasn't remarkably tall, but he was very solidly built, and he had that great voice. And more so than either, he had another younger brother, was a Jesuit, Father James Reinert. More so than either Jim or Paul, he had the physical presence. Father Carl did. He really did dominate a room when he came in.
And did he raise the money to build the library?
That I don't remember very clearly, but I think he probably did. He had been president here for almost 10 years, I think, by the time the library was dedicated, so I'm sure he did raise the money for.
Well, it would seem, without really knowing the history in detail, that he had a vision for Creighton.
Yes, he's often called the second founder of Creighton University, and he really did have. He built the library, the business administration school. He really did change the look of the campus.
And so it would seem highly appropriate that when they put the addition on, that they named it in his honor, correct?
Yes, yes. By the time the addition was built, he was no longer president, but he had left a real legacy to Creighton, and they wanted to name it after him. Yeah.
Was he still alive at that time? He died in the late 70s, or maybe around 1980.
Yes. The thing I don't remember is what year the addition to the library was built. He was alive until then, but I don't remember exactly what year the addition was added.
But it seems like a perfect building to honor his
yes.
contributions.
Yes. I think he might have been still alive at the time that this was done.
Now, one thing, while we're talking about Father Reinert and his relationship with the library, all the stories Creighton people talk about, they talk about how he interacted with students and how concerned he was about students. I've heard so many stories from Creighton alums about their chance encounter with Father Reinert. And do you know of any involving the library particularly, or was this just part of his general concern for a great education?
I think it was just part of his general concern for great education, but it often seemed to me, as I got to know him better, I think his first love as a Jesuit was the students. He had been a remarkably successful teacher when he was a scholastic before he was ordained. And when he was first ordained, he was the assistant principal out at Creighton Prep for a year or so. And I often thought later, I think if he had his choice, he'd stuck with that kind of thing. He was very, very gifted and good at being president of the university, but I think his first love was the students. And that manifested itself here when he was president of the university. He spent time with the students, and they liked him.
So do you have any continuing relationship with the library since you're chaplain of the nursing school, or do you yourself use the library?
I use it occasionally. I haven't been a regular user of the library during these years. I used it a lot when I was a student here. I spent a lot of hours down here.
What was your experience as a student using this library?
I thought it was, I was just amazed at the resources they had even in those years for the library. Some of the periodicals and the connections to periodicals and articles that I needed, I wouldn't have thought I could get those until I started using the library here. Down in St. Louis, we were fortunate to have the Pius XII Memorial Library as part of St. Louis University. And there again, our classes were, the Jesuits' classes were such that we did a lot of our work in our own building and didn't have to go to the library's office. So really, I used the library more than I ever had before when I was here as a student, and I found it remarkably helpful. And the other thing I always remember, the people here, not only then, but in the years that I've used it since, have been remarkably helpful.
That seems to be everybody's feeling about Reinert Alumni Memorial Library. Do you have any other comments on the joyful celebration of the 50th anniversary of the library, just about the role of this library in the Creighton community, or your memories of the early days, just anything you'd like to add?
Okay. Can I tell you a story about Father Reinert?
Sure, I love Reinert stories.
One day I was going down the hall in the community, and he came up to me and he said, "Say, I have to take a business trip tomorrow to Kansas City. I'd like some company on the trip. Would you like to ride down there with me?" And I said, "Sure, I'd be happy to ride down there." So the next day we came and we left. We drove to Kansas City and we took turns driving. And we got into Kansas City, I remember, and I was driving, and we were just coming across the Missouri River Bridge into the downtown area of Kansas City, and I happened to look at the gas tank gauge, and it was right on E, right on E. And I said to him, I said, "You know, Father, we're going to have to stop for gas. We're almost out." And he said, "Oh, no, no, no." He says, "I have this all figured out. We've got just enough to get right to the front door of Rockhurst where we're going to stay." He said, "And then I'll get gas when I go out later this evening." Well, about 2 minutes after that, the motor started to just conk, and we were out of gas. And it was in a very, very tough neighborhood. I had to take a gas can, walk about 4 blocks to a gas station to get gas. But I always remember that he was so confident, you know, he had that all figured out, and he had done it before, he said, and he knew just how much he was going to use.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. Well,
it shows how confident he was in his own ability, you know. And
well, I covered his funeral as a reporter, and I have always remembered a story that his brother, Father Paul Reinert, told as part of his homily, and that was about one of the reasons that Carl became a Jesuit was that their family had owned a clothing store out in Colorado. Yes. You've heard the story about the 2 pairs of pants? You heard this one?
I think I might have, but I don't recall it.
And how a widow came in and needed a suit for her husband's burial, and Father Reinert sold him her 2 pairs of pants, and then realized that if he was that good of a salesman, he could be dangerous, so he'd better put it to some good use. Anyway.
Oh, that's a good story. That's a great story. They had a brother who ran that store for many years after their father died.
And anyway, is there anything else you'd like to say about this library and its role in the Creighton community?
I think that I'm just amazed. One thing personally, I'm amazed at the fact that when I was a student, doing a term paper for a class was a big, big deal. You sweated that out and spent days working on it. And it just amazes me now that when students have something like that to do, they can do it in 1 day. It's just amazing how the technology has improved to be able, you know, it's no big deal for the students now to get it put down on paper, get it printed up. That's remarkably easy compared to the way it was when I was a student. So I think the technology has improved so much, and I think this library has been on the, on the forefront of doing that. They're up with the times on the new technology, and the fact now too, I noticed that the old card catalog that we had is pretty much a thing of the past. Everything is done through the computer and system, and that's a big change too.
Yeah, card catalogs are in the Smithsonian.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, well, I thank you very much for your memories, sharing your memories with us.
Well, thank you, Eileen. It's been my pleasure.
Dr. Schlesinger, it's delightful to be with you again. And tell me what's special about Reinert Alumni Library from the standpoint of somebody who has been involved with Creighton. I won't say forever because that would make you feel old, but who's been involved forever?
Well, it started, my relationship with this library started because I was probably the most vociferous complainer about the library that existed when I came here in 1952. The Arts College Library occupied a small portion of the second floor of the administration building, now Creighton Hall. And the ceilings, fortunately, in that building were quite high. It was about a 12-foot ceiling. So where the registrar's office on the second floor has been for many, many years, the architects managed to squeeze in 2 floors, about 6-foot ceilings in both of them, one on top of the other, and that was the stacks. The stacks, I don't know what number of volumes the library had, but it must have been extraordinarily small.
You mean there wasn't even a freestanding library building?
Oh no, there was no library building.
Wow.
And in that incredibly small space was the entire collection used by the faculty, the students, the alumni of the Arts College. And it was pitiful. It was absolutely incapable of supporting the job that it really had to do, and I complained.
Who did you complain to?
Father Reinert, who was the president at the time. And Father solved the problem instantly, put me on the library board.
Okay.
I was now on the library board. At that time, nothing was happening, so the library board probably met once a year, listened to me complain. And that was supposed to take care of things. How the library came into existence actually, I don't know. In other words, what moved people to donate the money was at that time well beyond my understanding. But one day, we were indeed breaking ground.
If you were a good guesser, would you guess that perhaps it was part of Father Reinert's vision for remaking Creighton into a much better, bigger, finer institution, and that perhaps your complaining encouraged or allowed him to do what he wanted to do anyway?
Oh yeah. He was on his way, and his role as the kind of founder of the new Creighton, the Creighton of the later 20th century, was as a conduit to the business community. Prior to Karl Reinert, the business community liked Creighton, enjoyed having Creighton, but was very withdrawn in terms of active participation in it. And what Father Reinert managed to do was say, hey, you guys, you're in a position to build this place. And that was extremely important, that connection. People like Leo Daly were part of that conduit system, and it was very, very effective.
Well, who would have been some of the others? Peter Kiewit?
Peter Kiewit. I was a very junior person, so I'd say I knew that things were happening, but I didn't know the individuals.
Now, as I understand it, you had something to do with the renovation of the library. And I know that in addition to having taught every doctor who ever went through Creighton in your infamous Gen Bio class, they put you to use at some point in raising money, presumably from your grateful former students that you hadn't failed. Did that have anything to do with the renovation of this library?
Yes, the library, the Chris buildings, and ultimately the science building were a sort of a package. And
By that you mean Rigi Science,
Riggy Science,
rather than Hickson Lee.
right?
Later.
They were the needs. They were the perceived needs, which would not get funded in any way locally, and would require federal support, grant activity, and things of that sort. And it was in that sense that they used me. I had a grant. I had some people that I knew in Washington. I understood the role of faculty, the necessity to have investigative research faculty in order to attract some of this money. And that was essentially where I could serve. I think they overestimated the love and affection that my former students had for me.
Well, now I'm going to disagree slightly because you show up on every list of people's most memorable and even beloved faculty.
Yeah, in hindsight. No, they have been very generous in their affection for me, and I for them.
Now, talk a little bit about the role of this library with the faculty, and because I'm guessing you were still teaching classes while you were doing all of this, or at least. So talk about why you were willing to take on what amounted to another full-time job, and that's extraordinary dedication to this library.
The library, like the church, plays a very deep and essential role. Students always will tell you about the role of the church. They'll tell you about how when they were flunking some course, they were on their knees.
When they were flunking Gen Bio?
If they ever were flunking Gen Bio. They remember those connections much more deeply than they do the role of the library. But the faculty tends to think of the library as the mind, if the church is the heart and the soul, and the library is the mind. It contains the wisdom, the accumulated understanding, particularly of research publications. Being able to say to an entire class, we're on the edge right now of comprehending the way in which brains function. I want you to read some of the early work of the people who perceived that this was a functioning part of the body, this brain, and the enormous effort they expended in determining how a brain could conceivably remember and how it could imagine. And I said, you get this by reading the original publications that these, and that's where the library comes in. Those publications are here. The original stuff, the way in which the man thought. And so this is an extraordinary part of the heritage of the teacher. The teacher thinks of this place as his partner. Mm-hmm. I can send people.
What about the role of the library staff in that partnership, especially at this library?
Finding people who know how to really use a library is a joy. As individuals, we faculty members know a little piece of it. Mm-hmm. usually dependent on our graduate school days. But at some point you end up saying, I've got to have help. There's got to be somebody who knows where to go, where to find this stuff, to act as my agent with other libraries if we need to have stuff exchanged or borrowed. And that's where finding a library staff in existence, people who know what they're doing, can help you. That's a real joy. That's something really great.
You know, there are people that I think are idiots who maintain that there's no need for libraries because we've all got computers nowadays. Talk about what you see as the need for libraries in a digital age.
Well, you're asking somebody who barely understands the digital age. I have used my computer with great joy and I find stuff, but the library contains organized information. The library plus its staff is a thinking component. The internet doesn't do thinking for you. If you have no background and you simply come to the internet, you can't say to the internet, I don't know what I'm looking for, but find it. Find me something.
You know, or even if you know what you want to find, but are not an expert in search terms or something, would you say in some ways the internet may even make good librarians more important now than ever?
I cannot imagine what goes on in the unaided mind of a searcher on the internet. He's just simply smothered by this mass of rather arbitrary material. If he puts in, find me something about Connecticut in the 19th century, this tidal wave of stuff will come on him. There's got to be a pattern of how one goes about the search, what one excludes, and then the techniques. What do you actually type in and how do you phrase things? This is the place you'd have to come, because this is what these people do.
And would you say the people at Reinert are extraordinarily skilled and helpful from your experience?
They really are. And they're friends. Over the years, they become friends. And that's important because they get to know you. And frequently I'll have someone here say, well, I don't think you really want to know that. From where you're coming from, I think you really want to know this. And this turns out to be the antecedent of what I thought I was looking for. But they know that there is a background behind that, and that's the kind of stuff Alan likes. So yeah.
Well, to sum this up, thinking back to the earliest days before Creighton even had a library, your amazing involvement in getting us to this point. How do you feel? Do you have any just kind of concluding comments or birthday celebration remarks?
Well, what sticks in my mind is the physical reality, the building of the place. We tore down a horrible old red box of a building, which used to sit right here. And that had a hilarious quality to it because it was ceremonial in that it occurred right after the baccalaureate mass, and the entire student body was lined up on California Street The wrecking ball was ready to swing. Father Reinert had on a hard hat, and he was sitting in the cab with the wrecking ball guy. And they took the ceremonial swing. The ball hit the brick building, bounced off, didn't disturb a single brick. This building was not going to go lightly. And they finally had to settle for knocking a little decorative edge on it, knocked 3 or 4 bricks off. The students were cheering for the building. The next thing I know, they're digging a hole in this fabulous black and white building arose. And incidentally, I was on the board during that design period, and we had a remarkable conversation which was held between Leo A. Daly, Jr. and Mrs. Hamilton, who was the Dean of Women and who was a childhood friend of Leo Daly's. And Mrs. Hamilton said, "Why is this building so starkly black and white?" And Leo said, "That's a book. Books are black and white." And Mrs. Hamilton said, "But Leo, these are young people. They need color." He said, "Okay, I'll let you put a strip of wood along the front edge of the upper portion." And that was the color of the original library. Wow. Those are memories.
Thanks, Alan. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate this.
It's been fun. Thank you so much for asking me.
Mary, it's a delight to have my book club, private little book club partner here today to talk about Reinert Alumni Library. And you don't have to persuade me that you read, because I know how much you read. But what I want to talk to you about today is about your memories of this place as a student, where, as I recall, you were pretty good friends. Who's the new guy at Creighton?
Timothy something or other.
Don't you remember? I think you were in student government with him.
Yeah, he was the president, and I was one of his officers, yes.
Okay. Did the two of you hang out at the library?
Here's a very distinct memory of the library. We had our Student Board of Governors meetings. That's what the organization was called, was Student Board of Governors. We had our meetings here every Sunday night, I believe at 6:30 in the Union Pacific room. So that was always a very intense time. A lot of people milling about, and you know, those were the...
What years were you talking about?
Well, Tim was president in 1972-73, and he was on the board probably at least the 2 years prior to that as a representative of the College of Arts and Sciences, I'm presuming. I can't remember for sure. But he was the president his senior year. And, you know, we felt like we were talking about all of the important topics of the day. Not sure we really had any real power, but we sort of thought we did. And it was just a very intense time, and the library was the focal point for all of those meetings.
Oh, really? Now, besides meeting here, did you use the library facilities, since you were both obviously very good students? Did you use the library facilities while you were here to go check out a book or get help with a paper, or was it simply a gathering place?
Well, Sunday night it was the gathering place, and that was the night for politics. But during the week, the library was really the social venue of the campus. Now think about it. We did not have a student center. We did not have the Kiewit Fitness Center. We didn't have texting. We didn't have computers, and we didn't have cell phones. So you had to physically meet people in the library, and you would find your own special study carrel, and everybody sort of knew where other folks studied, so you would leave notes for each other if you needed to communicate. But it was where we gathered. It really, outside of the residence halls, it was the social center of the campus, I have to say.
Did they have the commons then, or any area beyond the Union Pacific room where students could gather, have a cup of coffee, hang out?
Well, not coffee. God forbid we bring any food or beverage in the library. We would get our hand slapped for that. But outside of the main library doors, I mean, I can't remember if we called it the Library Commons or something else, but there was a big lobby area with some benches, and that's where people hung out. That's where you took your study breaks, and that's where you saw people. And so it was a very social spot. If you needed to go to study, you better get out of that spot, because that's where everyone was congregating. That's where you saw people.
In other words, if you wanted to connect with somebody, the odds were, if you couldn't find them anyplace else, you'd go to the library and see either if they were there or somebody had seen them.
Right, absolutely. That was this main social connection. Absolutely.
Okay, my gosh, a human version of Facebook.
Kind of. And I actually have to tell you, I laugh now for several years we've had the promotion at the library of, when we would bring a freshman seminar, an RSP group, they would get a mug as sort of a trophy for participation. And I was almost in horror thinking, a mug? And they can bring this in the library? We couldn't bring a cup of coffee or a can of pop or anything like that in the library.
Well, I am shocked.
Yeah. It's much better now that way.
What about the library staff? Talk about them as your memories of it as an undergrad. What were they like to students back when?
To tell you the truth, the folks on the staff that I remember the most distinctly, now understand we're talking 1969 to 73, were the older gentlemen, retired folks who had kind of part-time jobs working here in the library, and their most distinct mark was that they wore blue suit coats, kind of bright blue suit coats, and they were the library guards. And they kept quiet, they kept order, they kept your feet off the furniture, they kept the coffee out of the library, and truthfully, quite a few of them were very crabby.
Did they come by and try to wake you up if they caught you sleeping in a carrel?
Sometimes they would come and wake you up. Mostly I remember them shushing us. Shh, shh, stop talking.
You mean you actually talked to each other?
Yeah.
Even
We
with
couldn't
that-
text, remember?
Oh, that's right. You were stuck with the old-fashioned.
That's right. So, and if you had group study, which group study was not as popular as it is now, we didn't have as many rooms to go to. So if you congregated in an area of the library, and whether you were talking socially or trying to study, if you got a little too rowdy and you saw the library guard coming, you knew you had to shut up and disperse. And truthfully, if you put your feet up on furniture or up on a desk, they would come and knock your feet off. And they were pretty intimidating kind of guys. So they kept the order.
They kept the order. Okay. Do you remember anything about the hours? How late could you stay here? Did you have anything like the 24-hour, I think it's 24-hour now, at least during finals week, or at that point, did women still have hours and so you were restricted as to what hours you could use the
I think by the time I got here in '69, those rules had lessened a little bit. In terms of what women could wear on campus, that was gone by the time I got here because they had to have a skirt, and no, we didn't have that. What I do remember very distinctly is it was really the home, especially for so many of us who lived at home, who were town students. This was the only place that we really could go. When you weren't living in the residence hall, you didn't have a student center, so it was a major gathering place for town students, and not just socially, but obviously to study. And we studied late. I remember driving home late at night. Now late, I mean 11 or midnight. Probably not later than that. I don't remember the library staying open all night. It seems like it closed at 11 or 12, something like that. But I remember driving home and stopping for donuts with friends on the way home, or hot chocolate kind of thing. We stayed, that was pretty late for us.
What's your favorite memory of the library?
My favorite memory of the library was connecting with, communicating with, hanging out with, going back and forth with the fellow that would become my husband.
Oh, talk about that.
Well, he was 2 years older than I was, so I was a sophomore when he was a senior. That's when we started hanging out, and we just always connected at the library. let's take a study break, let's go out for a walk, let's go get something to eat. We were always going into or out of the library together. He knew where I studied, I knew where he was. We had lockers. Town students had lockers in the library as well, so we would, leave notes at the locker kind of thing. And there might have been a kiss or two way in the back book stacks. I'm not quite sure about that, but there might have been.
I'm shocked.
And just lots of back and forth and in between classes, and just checking in with each other and how are things going and helping each other. And then he went to law school, so he didn't study as much in this library, but certainly some, and we just would lots of back and forth. So those are my certainly my most pleasant memories by far.
Now, Mary, you've been super active, well, first of all, as a coach and as an administrator and being in charge of retention. What is your grown-up relationship with the library and how you see it serving the students, especially the at-risk students that you deal with?
My grown-up version of the library, at least what I try to communicate with students, and certainly the students that are at risk, is you got to get there, kids. You got to find a way to be there, to use it. And sometimes from some students, especially those who have trouble maybe concentrating, say, I can't go there, it's too quiet. Okay, put on some maybe quiet music, without lyrics. Your room can be the worst place to study. In fact, good students study in the library. They find a place that works for them where they're isolated. I say, don't sit right out by the window where you look up every time someone comes by and you're waving and you're saying hello, and your eyes are not down at the page very often. That can take you 3 times longer to get the work done if you have that many interruptions. If you go to a quiet place with a study carrel and you got the blinders on, you can get your work done in so much more of a concentrated way. And sometimes it's hard for students to really understand the benefit of that. When they get that, when that clicks in, their amount of study time goes up per week, their performance goes up, they start to feel like a student, I think, an academic person. They've got to get out of their rooms. They just have to get in this facility. And I would have to say, for students to understand how incredibly helpful and friendly the staff is as they help them with research, finding the documents that they need, helping them with all of the digital kinds of materials that are available, to absolutely take advantage of that. It's an unbelievable resource.
I went to UNL, and not to knock it, but the librarians there had very little to do with undergraduates. If you needed help, you were kind of out of luck. Talk about how Creighton librarians work with students.
Well, my experience has been that they are so service-oriented, that they want to help, that they are absolutely pleasant. And I want to ask you, have you ever seen Mary Nash in a bad mood? Have you ever seen Nathan Morgan be grouchy? You just don't see those folks be anything but trying to be genuinely helpful. And I feel like students could ask them any question about anything and how to find, and they would get the help that they needed, because that is their absolute #1 priority.
And they really do guide students through the complexities of research projects, don't they?
Right. And I think that, students coming in for the first year, they don't know all about the digital materials that are available and how to maneuver through the databases, and they are very happy to teach them. They are extremely helpful.
What about the mysteries of citation, which can make or break you?
I have no idea how to do that. I would ask one of those folks. I have one other story I have to tell you that's a very strong memory here of the library.
Excellent.
Okay?
Please tell it.
A lot of us as town students studied downstairs in the library. There was a row of desks. That was the quietest place to go if you really needed to concentrate and prepare for exams or whatever. So a lot of us had places down there. But I remember as a freshman town student feeling so intimidated about going over to the cafeteria, not knowing very many people, certainly not knowing anyone in the residence halls, and just studying all the time. In between classes, study, stay late at night, study, and then drive home. But so intimidated to go over to eat lunch or dinner that I would take my tuna fish sandwich, sack lunch I brought from home, go into the women's restroom, and eat my tuna fish sandwich in the restroom. And I think, how pathetic, how incredibly pathetic. So when kids feel disconnected or disoriented or not understanding how to, hook up with the resources and the groups and the people that are available, I say, we all go through our sad, forlorn times, and you got to jump out of that and jump out of yourself a little bit to get connected. But I always feel like that's sort of a pathetic story. I can't help but think about it every time I walk by that restroom in the library.
What do you think about the future of the library, and as far as how do you envision Reinert remaining that kind of heartbeat of the campus that you have described from your student days?
I think it's got to get bigger. I think it has to have more study space. The demands during finals and midterm week they just get maxed out, that kids can't, we just don't have enough study spaces. Need more study space, need more group study spaces. We need a coffee shop kind of thing close by where they can read and go have a cup of coffee or read and talk to a friend. I think we need to stay open later. We need to, I don't know if 24 hours is necessarily absolute, but I think we do need to expand the hours, and we just need to expand the physical space, because you do want it to remain the heartbeat of the university. You don't want it to be a dilapidated kind of facility. You want to keep it up, and it's so central. It's so centrally located that you also want to keep it this a center of communication as well, and we need to keep our eye on that.
Now, some people have said that with digitization and everybody, particularly now that no student is more than 2 seconds away from a digital device, that some people have said, why do we still need libraries? Other than hangout spaces, talk about the information needs that only a library and trained librarians can provide for students.
Yeah, I'm not sure students can understand how to maneuver through some of the databases in a very complex way. I think they need some assistance with that. And you probably don't need as many hardcover books. There's no way that a library can keep up with that. It obviously is going the way of the digital, but you can't just study with you and your computer in a spot all by yourself without doing group work, without having some guidance from an academic authority or librarian. You can't just do it all by yourself between you and your computer. And I do think the group study opportunities are huge, but I also think just quiet study spaces. You have to have those available when you have to provide spaces like that for students when they have intense studying, complex studying. They need quiet, they need space, they need calmness, and you can't always have that in the residence hall, and you certainly can't, in a student center or a dining room. That's not what those places are designed for. Sometimes you can study there, but other times you just need real peace, quiet, for concentration.
Now, Mary, since you deal with at-risk students, would you say many of them have concentration issues to begin with?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the preponderance of ADD and ADHD and inability to concentrate for a prolonged period of time is very challenging to lots of students. So for them to stick with the subject for 30 minutes is a real challenge to some. So we need to reduce distractions instead of increase. And, all of our electronic stuff certainly can increase the distractions.
What else would you like to say about Reinert, your memories of it, its role in the Creighton community? What else would you like the people who listen to this to know?
I just have so many memories of students of my vintage in those years, of just going back and forth every day, every weekend, in, out, through the library, that this really was the connection place. And I still have visions of people in their winter coats in and out, and on a spring day, what that would look like. But that this was really the center. And if you wanted to see someone, talk to someone, this is most likely where you would find them. And lots of good students that have gone on to do some pretty amazing things as professional folks and doctors and lawyers and dentists. And in their undergraduate days, they were here in this library establishing themselves academically.
So in other words, you would say that as a place that was integral to people's memories of their student years, this would probably rank right up there, maybe behind St. John's or something like that.
Oh yeah, as a place, and not just the brick and mortar, but as the connections that occurred within that facility, that this was the spot.
Laura, refresh my memory about roughly what years you were at Creighton.
I worked at the library here from 1968 through 2006. Actually, I retired January 2007.
Okay, and when you retired, what was your title?
I was head of technical services, which includes cataloging, acquisitions, and collection development.
Okay, so you really lived through a technological revolution in libraries that took it from probably pretty much what it had been in 1878 when they opened the place up to today. Talk about the technology, in quotes, that the library had when you started.
When I started here, almost all operations were manual operations. And
Explain what that means.
well, we utilized a lot of student workers. I bet we had twice as many student workers than the library employs today. And we literally, when I started working here, typed the card sets, the author, title, subject cards that go in the old card catalog. Those were typed. And so you can imagine how many people that took, and including staff and student workers. Well, then we evolved into semi-automation, and we joined OCLC, which is a national consortium of libraries who input their cataloging into a national database, and we eventually ordered our card sets from them. And that was then input into our first online catalog, which was called PALS.
I remember
PALS, which is a command-driven system. But also we ordered card sets from the Library of Congress, and it took forever. Now you virtually have real-time entry of our resources. At that time, we had to order the card sets from the Library of Congress, and that could take anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months before you received the cards to go in the card catalog. So what we did, we created a section called the W section, which were typed blue cards, and you just had authors and titles. And those new books went in that section on the shelves downstairs alphabetically by author. And so the students would have to look for new books down there. And then once the card set came, then it got the call number applied, and then they were put on the shelf in the Library of Congress.
Well, and it's not only the cataloging that has changed. Talk about the bad old days of bound volumes of periodicals and the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature and the bound volumes of the New York Times Index.
Yes, it was a very slow
Tell the
process.
students, as we would say, about medieval days.
Yeah, the dark ages for librarians. It took a lot longer. Students nowadays that want things instantaneously would think they couldn't live with this. But you would have to use the Reader's Guide and other...
Well, explain what the Reader's Guide was. Those of us of a certain age certainly know, but...
The Reader's Guide is a subject guide to specific journals, various subjects. These were more general. What evolved after that were social science guides and science guides, but Reader's Guide was like to Time, Newsweek, some of the basic journals, and you looked up the subject that you needed and found references to periodical journals. Well, then you had to go to the periodical and pull those off the shelf, and then you either had to photocopy them, or if we didn't have them, you went through interlibrary loan. And interlibrary loan, when I first came here, also took forever. What you did was you sent everything to Lincoln, to the Nebraska Library Commission, and then they would go through Denver, which has a bibliographic center there, and then they would find the article and send it back to you. So what we thought was really fast in those days would be a week to 10 days to receive a journal article if we didn't have it. So,
Tell us about that ancient tool, which seemed pretty miraculous actually, known as microfilm and microfiche.
Microfilm and microfiche is another irritant that students today. There might still be some around. I'm not sure. I think there might be, and I'm not sure. But
well, they're actually, we have quite a bit here.
Yeah.
And I recently used quite a bit of it for a
Yeah,
research
some of the
project I
older
was working on.
Exactly. We have some of the old New York Times and some older.
But there's now actually, thank God, a database that has
Yes,
that my students can
exactly.
use for the one assignment I used to inflict on them with microfilm. But talk about microfilm and
Microfilm, of course, was a run of usually a journal or newspapers, and again, you would find your article through an index, and then you would have to go upstairs. We had cabinets full of microfilms by year, and then those microfilms would be put on a machine, microfilm reader, which were big teepee-shaped things that took up a lot of space and usually didn't fit well, and maybe halfway through your research assignment somebody'd have to come and help you because something jammed or didn't fit or whatever. Well, then they took it a step further, which we thought was a little bit better, was microfiche, and that was like a card and went on a card reader, and those had several issues on one card. Those also were filed in drawers upstairs, and forever were getting out of place, and so we'd always ask students to put those cards in a box so the staff could refile them in order after they used them. But those two, I mean, there was an advantage to that in that you could get several volumes on one fiche card. But again, you had to have the reader, slow process. Compared to today, it's like lightning speed now. So.
Well, now, talk about the advent of the internet. That was in the early 90s, wasn't it?
Right. And we had just, when they moved to the internet and online catalogs, we did a major migration here from PALS, which is our original catalog, to our Circe system, which has gone through various versions until the one we have today. But the internet changed everything, and especially for those people in reference. All the databases went online. We started purchasing. Our materials budget changed, actually. I would say from the late 70s to the early 80s, most of our budget was in print material. By the time
That would include newspapers.
that would be newspapers, serials, magazines, journals, and books. And that's where primarily most of our materials budget was allocated for those materials. By the time I retired, 3/4 of it went to online electronic resources and databases, e-books, and e-journals. And I'm not sure what it is today, but I'm sure it's probably at least 3/4 or more.
Okay, well now, as I recall, I started at Creighton in 91, and I can remember kind of vaguely, sort of somewhere back there in the primeval mists, that the library in many ways taught both faculty and students how to cope with the internet. Do you want to talk about that? There was a training classroom or something?
The reference department did start having training classes for faculty, staff, and students. And our early databases, we used the internet. There were some that were available publicly through the internet, but this was before we started subscribing to online databases. But our problem is a lot of times students would take anything, and we still have that problem today. They do not know the authority of the sources, and I think that's where a good librarian still should be utilized, because we don't always know what sources they use. They get anything off the internet, and we're not sure, what the authority is and where it's from. So I think we need to help interpret that for them.
I remember bringing classes over here where a reference librarian, probably Mary Nash, would explain to terrified students, now this sounds so bizarre, terrified students what the internet was. A lot of them were afraid of it, almost, and they knew they wouldn't be able to cope with it or do it. And she would explain what the internet was, vaguely how it worked, what the library had, etc. And I'm assuming you did a lot of that for other people's classes.
Well, we did. Now, I was in technical services, and so we didn't do so much of that. As far as the classes, those were the reference people that handled that. But, if we were on duty at the reference desk, we would We didn't have as many terminals, of course, at that time. I think when Michael came, about the time Ray Means left, and then when Michael came in, we doubled the number of terminals and study care and individual study carrels we had at the time.
Well, now, talk a little about what the advent of technology has enabled Reinert to do that it couldn't do in the days when you were restricted to what your print budget could purchase.
Well, I think primarily just the speed of accessing information would be the most important thing. Like I say, it took a long time to search your resources, if we didn't have them, to get them from somewhere else. But with the advent of technology and the internet, things would just increase in speed and accessing those.
Well, one thing that's always struck me is our collection here compared with the major Research One library is of modest size. But there's really nothing you can't do from this building, is there?
No, not really, no.
I mean, unless it's, go through ancient parchments in the Vatican Library or something. But
even a lot of those have been digitized. Right. So there really isn't much that we can't access here.
And so, in effect, you can take a modest-sized library with superb staff like Reinert, and a faculty member can really be pretty much on a par for research with somebody at a Michigan or a Duke or a Harvard.
I think so, and I think that's increasing more when we've moved. Now, right before I retired, we started digitizing more things, and other libraries were sending their collections to be digitized, and University of Michigan is one of the leaders in that. But that's just an ongoing part of technology that I think will, you will be able to stay pretty much where you are on your own campus and do your research.
How would you describe the attitude of the library staff towards the technological revolution? I mean, at this library.
Well, I think 10, 12 years ago, it scared us too. Everybody was frightened by that. And at one point, we thought, well, there's going to be no need for the librarian, no need for the reference staff, because all that information is there.
You mean right there in your box?
Right there in your, yes, exactly. And again, though, the students, you have to have some guidance from the faculty and with the help of librarians in making sure they're getting the right information, not just any information.
Well, I've talked to a number of faculty members this morning, a couple of faculty members, and they say that with the internet and the complexities and the wealth of material potentially available, they need librarians more now than they did in the old days.
Well, that's good to hear, because there was that controversy at one time that first the technical services department was going away. That was the rumor for a long time. And then the story was no, reference is going away because everybody can do it themselves. But I think it's kind of come back, and you need to have some help in interpreting those.
I think if reference went away, you would have placard-carrying faculty marching down the mall.
Well, that's good to hear.
And probably some students as well.
I'm sure, yeah. And we started doing, when you were talking about classes before, we did classes on basic information, and then we started doing different databases, so that the sciences, the social sciences, each had their own databases to study.
Kind of drawing this to a conclusion, what do you view as the future of the library now that we've established that libraries are going to be here and librarians are definitely important?
Well, the one thing is that it changes constantly. You almost can't say. If you would have asked me in 1968 where we'd be today, I don't know what I would have said. But I think that you're going to continue having access to more of the world's information. I think that you may have some smaller staffs, but more specialized staff. But I think the library will always be here, hopefully. It may change. Again, it's gone more to technology than the print sources. But it's just hard to say where it's going. But if I see the next changes in the next, 30, 38 years that have gone in the past, who knows?
Okay, a final question. What is your personal favorite memory about Reinert from all the years you spent here?
Probably when we did the Stolen Rare Book project.
Talk about that.
You know, I'm thinking it was about 1978. I'm not sure about the date. I'm thinking it's late 70s, early 80s, somewhere in there. And there was a book thief that stole books from across the country. He had impersonated a professor from the University of Minnesota. And anyway, they discovered who he was. He had a false ID. And somehow they brought the books to Omaha. What had happened was that the person who stole the books was from Iowa. The FBI office was in Omaha. So the books were brought to Omaha, to a warehouse here in Omaha.
How many books were there?
Oh my gosh. I'm thinking, you know, Eileen, I'm thinking there were like 20,000 books.
There was a lot. I know that.
I'm not real sure,
Okay,
but it was a lot.
It was a lot.
It
It
was
wasn't too much.
No. It was a lot. And what they did was they put them in a warehouse here in Omaha, and they even took the librarians. We weren't supposed to know where we were going. We weren't supposed to tell anyone where we were going.
Did they pile you into a van?
Yes, they did, and they took us there, and we had to have FBI clearances. We thought that was pretty cool. You know, we've been cleared by the FBI.
Woo!
So we had our clearances, and what had happened was they discovered there were books from all over the country. There were books from Harvard, Yale, University of California system, and there were several books they couldn't determine where they were from. They had no ID marks on them at all. And so what they did is they got librarians from Creighton, the 3 libraries here at Creighton, and University of Nebraska, UNO, and they had us volunteer to search those books on the OCLC database to determine maybe where they came from. They would often say how many copies each library had. And of course, we're a very trusting lot, and so if some libraries claimed that they had books missing that they thought were in that group, then we would say those books go there. So this went on for, 4 or 5 months, and we volunteered our time. And at the end of that project, there were probably, I don't know, there was like maybe 10 shelves of titles that they were unable to determine where they came from. And so since Creighton had the most librarians working on the project, Creighton inherited those books, and we still have them here in the rare book room.
I was going to ask if any of them were
And we have a first edition Milton's Paradise Lost here. That was from the Blumberg project. So and so we got to handle a lot of manuscripts, rare books, see titles we would never have been able to see if we hadn't worked on that project. So I would have to say that's my favorite.
Anything else to add?
We had funny things happen.
Okay, give us a couple of those.
Well, one of them was in the balcony after we did the remodeling in 1984, early 80s. The balcony, when it was Halloween, I think, and whoever was at the reference desk that night, they heard this huge bang, plop. Somebody had thrown a dummy or a mannequin over them. And it was dressed and he had coveralls on and scared us all to death. But that was one of the more fun things. That was probably
Do you have memories of students wigging out during finals or doing bizarre things?
Yes, because what we'd do is stay open all night, and we'd ask for volunteer staff to come in and man the circ desk, and let them study in here. And yeah, they'd sneak in pizzas and food to stay awake, and we kind of overlooked some of those things. Difficult time for them, so it was okay.
So you had a great career here.
I did have a great career, and I could tell you these funny little stories all day long, but you know, some of them are probably best left unsaid too.
To protect the guilty.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, Laura Lee, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Tom, okay, what we've been talking about are people's memories of Reinert Library and its role that it has played in their lives. So I'm starting with kind of an open-ended question just about, tell a little bit about, I'm not sure what years you were in school here and when you joined the faculty, and your memories of the role that this library has played in your life at Creighton. So.
Okay, well, I actually started coming down here in 1963 when my cousin was a freshman here and I was a freshman at prep, because there were more resources here for high school paper projects. So I'd find a way to get here to work on research projects that I might have at Creighton Prep. that were beyond whatever resources we had in that library there. I also used the downtown library and the local branch library, but this was a main source of research during my high school years. And the same thing when I started in college here in 1967. You know, this was the resource for most of us because it was, and at that time, I think the most complete library in the city, if not one of the most. And so very convenient, very accessible, and very comfortable in terms of access because it was right here on campus and you could go right after class. And I got to the point where I knew exactly where I needed to go when I was majoring. You know, looking for things in my major, I would go right to the rack where it was and could almost browse my way to a book I needed rather than using the card index.
So what was your major?
Accounting.
Accounting,
Yes.
okay. And so they would have all those books, of course,
Oh, yeah.
in a very condensed.
HF 5601, et cetera. So
Yeah.
still remember the call letters. So
As an accounting major, those of us in the humanities or social sciences would not necessarily think of accounting as being a major where there would be, you know, the kind of extensive book research that you would find in liberal arts. Why don't you enlighten us about that?
well, it was mostly in my senior year that I had some research requirements because most of our other classes were very procedural and problem oriented. But when we were seniors, we had a senior almost a seminar, and so I did a pretty significant research paper in that senior seminar that required us to go back and look at a particular accounting principle and figure out why that principle developed the way it did and what some of the implications were from that for businesses and for the economy and things like that. So it did require, and actually that was a jump for me to get into graduate work because the professor in that class liked what I had done and suggested that I might want to consider graduate work in accounting, and so I pursued that at his recommendation.
What about your core things? I assume back when you had to take the same core classes in theology and philosophy that have always been part of Jesuit
Yes.
education. Did those draw you in?
Oh yeah, all the time for paper projects, or I remember taking a class, and I can't remember who it was right now, but he was a rather controversial Jesuit back in the late 60s, and started me reading the National Catholic Reporter and started reading some other things on social justice even back in the late 60s. And this was the source for them because it wouldn't be something I'd find in the Omaha World Herald or in the Wall Street Journal. So this was the source to find those types of items.
Well, you wouldn't have found them even in the Omaha Public Library.
Probably not.
No, I know that. I can vouch for that because when I came to Omaha and wanted some of those materials for my own personal reading, they were not at the old downtown library. So this was the source for certain kinds of materials, pretty
Yes.
much, not only in Omaha but in the state or in the area.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Yeah. Now, I just talked to Mary Higgins, who was a student at roughly the same time as you were, and she has all kinds of memories, as she said, for townies, of this being where students spent their time between classes, connecting with classmates, sort of the social center of campus before the student center and the fitness center and all that. Do you have similar memories?
I would have to say no.
Okay.
I found Lower Brandeis pretty quickly, and that was it was a cafeteria.
Uh-huh.
They had a little room off to the side where there were some tables and pinball machines,
Yeah,
and so if I only had an hour in between class, I'd probably go over there and grab a bite to eat and hang out with some guys rather than come over here. And if there was a longer period of time, I lived pretty close. A lot of times I would just go home and study at home instead of here. I would study down here to get away from home when things were noisy. I had younger siblings, and if I couldn't study at home, I'd come back down to campus to study, but not a lot during class, or between classes.
What about your memories as a faculty member? When did you join the faculty?
First time in '75, and then I was going to law school then and teaching part-time. and then full-time in 79.
So in your law school years, you mainly would have used the law library, obviously.
Right, and I started here to the west in the old law building and finished in the new law building. So the transformation of that library was incredible. But this one had stayed pretty much the same as the way I remembered it from my undergraduate years. Didn't have a lot of reason to come here other than we had a pretty extensive accounting and tax set of materials, and so I was still doing some CPA work, and that was a very nice resource. We had the government documents, and we also had loose leaf tax services that were kept up to date.
Now, is this a government documents depository library?
As far as I know, it is.
Okay, so that would have meant that you could find stuff here that would be difficult to locate elsewhere that you might need, like the latest IRS rulings or filings.
There's weekly reports that come out from the IRS that we get here at this library, yes.
How much use do you ask your students to make up this library?
It varies with the class. In my undergraduate tax class, I have them do a tax research project. That's all available online now.
Right.
And so the service is online, and they don't have to come over here to use the material. They can access it from home because it's a web-based tool. For graduate studies, there may be paper requirements where, you know, they need to come over here, but I don't require that they come over here to do something. The undergrad freshman year, when I do RSP, I'll make sure that they come through here just so they are aware of all the resources that we have here.
Now, Tom, you raise a point that I think is kind of central to the future of libraries. And a lot of people, I just talked to Laura Lee Grabe, and she was talking about how when the internet came in, people were saying, well, reference librarians will go away because everything is available online. Talk about your experience with that. Obviously, the materials are online, but do you still see a role for libraries in the world where pretty much everything is being digitized? And
oh, definitely. I mean, there was and you might want to check on their webpage. There was a story this morning on NPR where they were interviewing a librarian and a independent book owner in D.C. And they were having just this discussion. You know, what's the future of the hard copy versus the digitized, the e-reader versus books? And the consensus was we need both. And I think we do.
Why do we need both?
Well, because people access things in different ways.
Okay.
And some things are more suitable to having them in front of you. You know, for example, if I'm doing a pretty significant tax research project, it is much more convenient to have an array of 10 books in front of me where I can pick and choose and go back and forth between them than to have 10, for me personally, to have 10 tabs where I can flip back and forth. To me, it's more efficient. And that may change as this generation comes about, but for right now, that's what I see as an advantage.
Now, when you're doing research as a faculty member, do you make use of the reference librarians, or are
Yes,
you...
I have.
Talk about how you use them.
Well, I'll be looking for something and I know that it's out there, but I can't find it. So I'll go and talk with them and say, the way I'm searching, I'm not finding something, but I know it's there. So help me, let's figure out a strategy to find this item. Or it might be that something hasn't come in that I know should be available yet, so why haven't we received it yet? So they can follow up and figure out what the problem is with that.
So how have you always found this staff and this library?
They're great, great people. I mean, I remember, you know, Ray Means. I remember lots of people that have come through here. Mary Nash has always been a favorite. And, you know, just people that have been here and devoted their careers to this place are what make this place, this library, such a valuable resource for us.
So what's your personal favorite memory of Reinert?
That's kind of my personal favorite. Well, I mean, it's going to sound kind of strange, but I remember when we expanded it, And
When was that?
I don't remember the year, but I remember I was teaching.
Okay.
And I was teaching on the south side of the Epley building.
Okay.
And I remember when they were using the pile drivers to create the foundation. And I remembered having to talk in between the hits of the pile driver because it was so loud that we couldn't really conduct class. It was bang, bang, you'd talk real fast, and then you'd pause for a couple minutes as they did the banging. But in terms of the facility usage itself, lots of good memories. Nothing really stands out as gee, that was a major thing. I just remember how comforting it is, and how it's very unusual if I'm looking for something that I can't find something, and how pleasant it is to have people that you can talk with and help guide you. I think that's the reason why librarians or book sellers who are involved in the process of selling books, or whoever it might be, that a person that can listen to what you're saying and do something that an online analog can't do, and that is to really understand what it is that you're trying to find, and then use their creativity with your creativity to find the solution.
Do you find, as I've always found in working particularly with Mary, who is my right arm in doing any kind of research, Mary Nash, do you find that by interviewing you and questioning you, they help you focus or get a sharper picture of what exactly it is you're trying to find, or better understand your own research project?
I think that would depend on what I was doing. If it's in my technical area, it's probable that they're not going to be able to help too much. I'm more helping them understand so they can help my students or others than them helping me understand. Little different if I'm talking to one of the law librarians, because the law library research materials, they understand better than I do. And so I might not understand how to get someplace, and they can help me with that. But for Mary, it's more trying to make sure that the lines of communication are real strong. So if I'm over here looking for something, it's not just necessarily for me, it could also be for students, to make sure it's easy for them to get access to.
But in other words, they're actually a partner in the teaching process, in helping your students learn to learn.
Very much so. Yes, I think so.
Okay. Tom, any other final comments you would like to add?
It's always been, we're sitting in this room, the rare books room, and I remember not knowing that this room even existed for many, many years. It was like this super secret place. And then I was able to get in here a few times, and I've always been a lover of books. I have thousands of my own, and so being able to just browse and look at these shelves once in a while is really a treat. So thanks for having us in here.